Here is the second podcast in our Inside the Summit series. This episode features Lawrence Kane and Paul Becker from Boeing, speaking on the topic of the sourcing innovation conundrum.
A lot of experience in the industry doing this type of work. Boeing has given me a viewpoint of sourcing maturity that I hadn't had before, and today we'll show you some of that.
And I'm Lawrence Kane. I hired him a long time ago, so if you like what he has to say, you can blame me, or wait a minute, credit me? I don't know how that works. So hopefully everybody's here to learn a little bit and also contribute a little bit. We'd like to make this a little bit interactive. So if we get the blank stares, we'll call on people. Hopefully we'll actually entertain you a little bit while we're teaching about this. I created our IT infrastructure sourcing office and been responsible for our sourcing strategy and even actually our IT strategy for quite a while. So looking at the business to the need to the what do we do, what do we not do to suppliers. And what we're going to talk about here is how to get innovation out of your deals with your suppliers where it's appropriate and whether or not you're even ready to do that so that you can actually be successful. Oh, okay. I forget who's supposed to do which slide. So hopefully you've heard of Boeing. If you haven't, hopefully you flew down here on an airplane that we made. We do a bunch of other stuff too. We're the largest aerospace and defense company in the world. We're, I think, number 28 or something like that on the Fortune 500. We have about 170,000 people in virtually every state in the United States and 70 countries. And they're really, really smart people. Like, we hire rocket scientists and whatnot. We got all kinds of PhDs. We have all kinds of people with master's degrees and other advanced. So, for example, some of you have heard of data analytics. The guy that wrote the test to become a certified data analytics professional works for Boeing. So that's the kind of folks that we deal with. And some of the products you can see on the side that we do. So it's airframes, missile systems, all kinds of fun stuff. Very, very high technology. And it was kind of amusing flying home from one of these conferences, talking to a guy from a Seattle-based software company that said, Boeing's not high tech. Like, we're in a Boeing airplane. No, that's, we write software. Really? Let me tell you about engine control software. Let me tell you about missile system guidance software. And let me tell you about things like Smart Dust. So if you've heard of that, it's a DARPA contract. We do that kind of thing too. So lots of really interesting stuff. And the reason it ties into this is a lot of that is trying to drive innovation for the government, for our airline customers, for the folks that we sell stuff to.
So we're going to talk about a few things here. I'm going to go through this slide very quickly. And we only have about 11 slides, so this will be an interactive session because we're going to run out of things to show you in just a second. So we're going to define innovation. Many people think they know what innovation is, and everybody has their concept of what they're looking for in innovation, but we're going to talk to you about what we think innovation is. How to achieve innovation with your suppliers. Different suppliers have can be different objectives with those suppliers. How to identify the right work, how to identify the right supplier, and how to know if you're ready to actually perform this effort. If you're ready, we'll talk to you about that today, and you'll see. And then determine the best one to fit your need. Of course, we always do that in every contract, right? So, who here knows what innovation is? What do you think innovation is to you? Somebody raise your hand and just let me hear it. Does anybody here know what innovation is? It's not a trick question. The future. Ideas above today, or ideas that you haven't considered yet. Okay. Anybody else? Continual improvement. Okay. Lawrence?
So our definition is it's something that solves an unmet business need. So remember, we're a really smart company with a whole bunch of techies, right? And the immediate response is always technology. We try to have the flavor of, as long as it buys its way in, it has to be something innovative. I'll give you an example, sort of a silly example, of something innovative just to kind of get the brains moving a little bit. How many of you remember, are you old enough to remember the ice cube trays that used to have the big aluminum blocks and had the handle in there, and you'd have to sort of chisel the thing, right? Anybody remember those? Okay, so my dad is an avid fly fisherman, and he went a fishing trip through a club with a bunch of folks, and if you know anything about fly fishing, you wear waders, right? They're rubber things that lets you wade out in the water without getting wet. Well, they went to the cabin for the night, and they left their waders outside, and in the morning they were frozen. And so my dad and a couple other folks he was staying with got up, and the guy who owned the cabin goes over, grabs his waders, twists it, the ice falls off, and his wife goes, "Hey, I have an idea." They are multimillionaires because they invented the flexible ice cube tray. Right? So every ice cube tray you buy today, you twist it, the ice falls out. That came from ice on a set of fishing waders.
So it's really not just what you look for in an opportunity, but what you haven't considered yet, right? Unmet business need. Basically, what you don't know, right? What can you give me that I haven't considered? So, does anybody have comments? At any point, you can jump in on the comments as well. So, how do you achieve innovation with your suppliers? It really comes down to a couple of things, and I have them listed up there, and I'll talk to you briefly. How much latitude do you give your supplier base? In an RFP, how much latitude do we give them in an RFP statement of work? Do we tell them exactly how to do the job, exactly how to deliver the solution, and exactly what we want from them? We're never going to see innovation from that, right? They're never going to try to do anything more than what we told them to do, and they're going to get paid exactly what we told them we were going to pay them. Is it price? And it goes to the next one, pricing and profitability. If you've nickeled and dimed them down so that all they can do is make the margin just to get through this with you, they're never going to see any reason to do anything more, right? Quality of your relationship. If it's a utility relationship, you tell them what to do, they go do it, they screw up, you tell them they screwed up. Again, there's no incentive for them. Some people call the relationships we're talking about in this situation that we're trying to get to today in innovation partnering. When you partner, you really build a dynamic relationship with them. You share responsibility, you share your understanding of what you're trying to achieve. The length of the agreement does matter. If you did a contract with somebody for 2 years, and they're only going to make their margin in the last 2 months of that 2 years, they're not going to do anything for you. If you've told them at the end of that you're going to do another compete, they would never try to do more for you. And then intellectual property concerns. This does come up, and this is a question we'll have in here, I'm sure. And then that comes up situations where sometimes they'll develop IP that works well for you, and if it only works for you, then maybe you need to tell them that you own that IP. But if it does work for others, maybe you have a negotiation opportunity to tell them, I will let you use that idea with everybody else, and maybe you'll give me a big discount. So make sure you give your suppliers their core work and your context work. You don't want them doing things they're not comfortable doing, but you definitely don't want to be doing work that they should be doing. Too many times we play in our suppliers' business. And get them to own the accountability for everything they do. Quit micromanaging them. Let them handle it. And of course, the last one, align interests with theirs. Align your interests with theirs, especially if you're trying to get the innovation out of the contract. You want to make sure that they know what you want and they know what they can do to support you. So, Lawrence?
So this is a view of a supplier stratification model. What we have realized is that not every supplier is capable of innovation. And so if that's what we want, great, but we shouldn't try to force it from somebody that it's not an appropriate way to deal with. So what we do is we have a model here that looks at the ability to provide business transformation and innovation. That's our vertical axis. And the horizontal axis is competitiveness and productivity. So go ahead and do the build out. I'll talk it all at once. So the idea is, depending on which quadrant a supplier falls into, we are going to engage with them differently. So if you're in the upper right-hand corner up there, that's the kind of folks that we would consider actually partnering with in a real and meaningful way. Whereas if you're in the bottom left-hand corner, you're still really important. We still love you, but we're not going to require innovation from you, and we're not going to engage in the same kind of manner. So that's something where, if you're a commodity type folks, we're really looking at, are you meeting those deliverables? Are you bringing those SLAs? As opposed to talking strategy, talking architecture roadmaps, talking the future, looking to solve those unmet business needs that maybe we don't know how to figure out. Yes. Now, not everybody should move to the right or up, but absolutely we reevaluate this on a recurring basis. I'd like to say there's a specific time frame, but there actually isn't. But it's really more about, where are they today? Where can they be? What are they doing for other folks? Are we the one, if somebody's down bottom left-hand corner, are we keeping them there by the way that we've written the contract or the way we're behaving? Or is it, that's really a good fit? So, if you're, a telco that's run by a foreign government, as an example, because we have to work with folks like that to get service to certain areas, probably they're going to stay on a commodity leader space, right? Because it's government owned. There's certain things we can't do because we're a defense contractor. We're just not even going to have that conversation. We're just going to talk about price, service level, that sort of thing. Whereas if you're somebody who's, outside of what we do, I used to work in our commercial airplane part of the company. If you're an engine provider, you better be up in that upper right-hand corner, right? If you're providing landing gear or wings or major engineering or even a full-in component, right, on our 787, for example, we actually buy the wings, which are massively important, from a supplier, complete, fully stuffed wing set, which means the wings, the control surfaces, the hydraulics, all that sort of stuff, right? That's sort of a big deal because you can't really fly without them, among other things. Well, you can fly, but you can't land,
Well,
So you get the idea.
You'll land eventually. So now we get to talk to you and hear your side of things. So has anybody had innovation? Do you have strategic partners that you've seen innovation? Anybody want to share if you do? Nobody in here has ever had a partner that's provided innovation to you. It's a first.
That is a first. So either you're all here because you need to learn this, or you're afraid to say stuff in public.
And you're not...
Oh, there we go. We got a hand.
Go.
That's great. Do you try to steer them too? As in, here's what our needs are down the road. Here's our preferred architecture. Here's challenges we're looking at and when they're coming, as opposed to just learning what they do for other folks? Yeah. Excellent. That's the kind of stuff that avoids conversations like this one. Hey, Lawrence, I can save you $30 million by offshoring your service desk to India. Really? Well, I don't spend $30 million a year, so that's sort of a challenge to start with. And if we did that, we'd go to jail. So tell me how this is a win for me. I don't understand. Right? Because for those of you who don't know, we're a defense contractor. We're an export-controlled business. We would violate ITAR-IR law by doing that and literally go to jail. And be debarred as a contractor and lose $1 trillion worth of business. So that's one of those things that if you know our business, you don't bring statements like that. And by the way, I had 3 different companies tell me that. So it wasn't just one. But the point is that when we share where we're going and the imperatives of our business, and they do the same thing, now we're starting to talk more of a partnering kind of relationship, which is where innovation can grow from. Yeah. Yeah, so there's 3 pieces to that. Piece number 1 is that we actually license the IAOP outsourcing masterclass material when we're teaching it inside the company. So we're starting with this isn't something we invented here. This is the way the world works. So there's an education path, right? The second thing is we have an intellectual property office that gets involved with all of these kinds of things, and we have some processes in terms of well thought out, right? Like Paul was saying earlier, if there's a solution that's custom made for us, maybe we want to own it. If it's something that they could turn around and resell to others that's not going to put our business at risk, let's encourage them to give us a good deal to try it out. And so, for example, Microsoft Exchange, anybody use that? Well, we were the first large adopter of that. We broke it because it couldn't scale, and we helped them fix it. Right? Now, we obviously don't own any licensing rights or anything to that other than what we buy in our enterprise agreement. But the point is that was a good partnering together kind of thing where we helped them beta test and make sure it would work at a corporate scale. They gave us a great price, and then they went off and gave it to everybody else. So even with COTS type things, you can sometimes do that. And then the last aspect of that, so there's the education, there's the group. It's one of the questions we ask ourselves in our sourcing model every time we go off and do things. So we got a roadmap and a process and toolkits and tip sheets and all the usual stuff, right? We document it. And this is one of the specific questions that we have listed in the process to try to make sure that we don't forget. Now that we know the stuff, now that we got, touch base, I mean, we're really big, and you sometimes get that whole you don't know what you know if you don't write it down. So that's how we try to close that loop. That's a great lead into the rest of the pitch.
Yeah.
The question here. Okay. Well, so she's saying, hey, yeah, we got stratification models, and we work with the suppliers and all this sort of stuff. But how do you incent them to actually bring innovation?
Yeah. So we will definitely talk about that further, but there's different approaches to it, and we've tried a lot of them. Should we move on? All right.
Okay. So you can tell we love quadrant charts. So everybody here, I think, has done an RFI, an RFQ, and an RFP, right? Not everybody's done an RFS necessarily, which is request for solution, or an request for partnership, which we didn't put on there, but it can be in that same box. The idea is there's the right tool for the right time. So if we're really needing a lot of innovation, and we don't know what's out there and what we want, but we're not really ready to buy yet, maybe we do an RFI, figure out what's out there, get smart, and then turn around and do an RFP, right? If we need it now, and we need innovation, and we don't know how to get there, that's when an RFS kind of approach is really appropriate. It's not something you can do with every supplier, and it's not something that we do all the time, but I'll give you an example of that. So how many of you have flown on a 737? Not everybody? God, I'm hurt. 737 is the most popular airplane out there, right? I don't even know how many we've made, like 5,000 of them or some ridiculous number. It's a lot, and that's ballpark correct. So the one unusual feature of the 737 that you can always tell is that the front of the engine is flat on the bottom. Have anyone noticed that? The engine cowl, instead of being round, it's flat on the bottom. So what we did is we went with one of our suppliers and said, hey, we're building a new airplane program. We need engines. They got to have this amount of thrust. They got to have this amount of reliability, some parameters. But we really don't want to raise the landing gear because that's really expensive. Go figure it out. That's an example of an innovation brought by a supplier through, we didn't call it an RFS, but that's really what it was. And that was 20 years ago. Right? So it's something we've been doing for a really, really long time. If you've read Kate's book, you get like sort of the modern process of that. We did something very, very similar 20 years ago without, we didn't know what vested was, but we figured out, when these guys are invested in us, and by the way, we pay them based on market share. It's not like an engine, here's your $20. It's not quite that simple, right? Because we're trying to align motivation to create something that's really, really important. Again, airplanes don't work so good without wings. They work really badly without engines. You can only go down. You can't go up, right? So we tried to get innovation by not telling them how to do what they're really, really good at. And it works.
All right, so there's another build and a little bit of details here. Lawrence, can you go through this real quickly?
Sure. So what we try to do here is look at maturity level of the sourcing organization. So you may have a supplier who's really, really good at innovation, but you might not be ready to actually work with them. One of the challenges that we have as a sourcing organization, if we're sort of procurement, dollar savings focused, and not looking at what success is in other places or on quality or speed to market or whatever it is, right? If we don't understand the business very well, it's really hard to speak for the business and to do anything more than just kind of buy stuff, right? RFQ. I need, a stack of I don't know, printer paper. How much, right? As opposed to if we're really up at that sort of higher, we call it a trusted advisor, but whatever term you want to call it, higher capability level where we are able to really build strategic partnerships. We've got a great relationship with the business so we can champion change. We understand what our strategies are so we can assure strategic alignment. And we're able to really get the agreements we need, right? Because we outsource stuff in order to support the business. We know the business strategy. Well, in our case, IT. We know the IT strategy. We know how that flows through and what's needed. That's the kind of place where we can do any of those 4 or 5, depending on how you want to call it, types of request for engagement with the supplier, and we're able to create and sustain innovation. If we're working down lower on there, I know folks at other companies that I talk to on a fairly regular basis. We do just kind of peer-to-peer network sort of stuff, right? And you hear frustration of, we got this great deal in place and nobody wanted to use it, right? You have those kind of conversations, you're not going to be able to get innovation, because even if you have the right contract, even if you have the right statement of work, the supplier comes in, does something, and the business doesn't want it, right? So that's the reason for the maturity level. And, you could do the 4 stages or 5 or however you want to build it. We just chose this version of it. But the point is that in order to be able to acquire innovation, you not only need the right supplier and the right capability in the marketplace, but you need the right capabilities and maturity internally in your own organization so that you can get what you need and you can actually make it work, and you can make it work through the lifetime of the deal.
So we're going to talk briefly about this option before we go into what an RFS is. But basically, has anyone not done an RFP in here? Okay, good. So, in an RFP, it's an apples-to-apples comparison, right? You tell them what you want, they bid on it, you compare them against each other, and the one with the best price or the best quality or the best blend of something is the one you take. But it's always an apples-to-apples comparison. We always know what we want. We always tell them how they're going to innovate, and that works out real well for us. We have certain risk in this situation, right? Our suppliers may tell us, yeah, we can do exactly what you defined in your statement of work, and then you hire them and find out they have no idea how to do what you asked them to do, and you're either paying them more or you're training them, or both, once you've signed them. The other risk you have are pretty inherent to the circumstance you've created. Bidders just don't know what you're asking for. You're telling them way too much in this RFP. You're getting them way too many requirements. There's a theme here, right? You're making a restrictive agreement with them that's limiting their scope and capabilities to be successful at what you hired them to do. They are supposed to be specialists in their field. That's why you brought them on. Let them be specialists.
Yeah, so before we talk about the RFS, let me do one other kind of polishing endpoint on the RFP. We have a tendency, because we deal with government contracts all the time, to act kind of like the government. Yea, verily, thou shalt, comply with blah, 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 blah. And we get into the kind of, our average contract is over 2,000 pages, okay? And that's in IT. If you want to go to something that actually ends up on an airframe, it could be a lot bigger than that. The point is, sometimes that's the right thing to do. That's exactly what we want, right? If we can compare apples to apples to apples, and the DCAA comes in and audits us and says, show me you're getting a market competitive price, great, I can do that, right? If it's something that we're asking for something that bottom left-hand quadrant of the commodity kind of stuff when we looked at supplier stratification, right? That's great. But sometimes that's not what we want. So instead of apples to apples to apples, like, hey, I'm hungry. No, we got an apple, we got a pear, we got a taco. Hey, I hadn't thought of tacos, but taco sounds pretty good, right? So if we want something and we don't know exactly what it is, but we know what success looks like, that's where doing a traditional RFP and giving a supplier a massive statement of work and very prescriptive service levels and locking down processes and tools they can or can't use and that sort of thing, it's the wrong answer. Now, the way we used to try to get around that is we'd do an RFP and we'd also encourage alternate proposals. How many of you have responded to an RFP? Anybody? And how long does it take? For something big and complex. Right? Say it's a $100 million deal for some big hunk of IT infrastructure or BPL.
How long would you like to have to respond? A month and a half, 2 months? We give you like 2 weeks, typically, right?
Right. So to Paul's point, if we give you a couple, 3 weeks to respond to a $100 million RFP, are you going to have time to do an alternate proposal? You barely have time to do the regular proposal, right? I've been on the proposal side too. It's a lot more fun to be the buyer, trust me. But if we go and encourage alternate proposals, sometimes people will come in and sort of give us something, but they really don't have time to go in and give us their best foot forward, right? Because they have to meet the male first, because we have this "yea, verily, thou shalt" thing, right? And so it makes it really, really hard. And our suppliers spend roughly $1 million to bid on our big RFPs, sometimes more than that. So it's a big investment in them too, right? So it does both us and them a disservice if we really want innovation and we do the RFP approach. Whereas if we want innovation, if we want something that's more commoditized and we do the RFP approach, it's great, right? So it all depends on why we're doing it and getting back to the maturity thing, how good are we at doing it and do we have confidence it's going to work? So the nice thing about an RFS is you're saying, hey, the bidders out there are mature enough to figure it out, right? They're people who can be innovative. We have faith that they can do it. We know what our success criteria, like going back to that point about the engine, right? I need this amount of thrust, I need this amount of fuel economy, I need this kind of reliability, et cetera, and I don't want to raise the landing gear. Go figure it out, right? That's the kind of thing that can set a supplier up for success. Those of you who've read Kate's book on vested sourcing, there's actually a process to it, right? But even if you're not doing the full meal deal like she's talking about and all the transparency and building a solution together, you could still come in and say, hey, bidders, tell me how you're going to solve my problem. And you can get things that you never thought about before. And they can be new technology, they could be new process, they could be different use of a same technology, whatever it is, right? It's not always a technology solution, but it's something that meets and solves that unmet business need, like we talked about way in the beginning of the presentation. Now, obviously, there's challenges here, right? If you go and try to do an RFS and the bidders actually don't know how to answer the question, you can all look at each other and go, whoa. And then it kind of turns into an RFI. You can't sign a deal and you have to go back and do an RFP when you figure out what you wanted because they couldn't give it to you, right? So that could happen. We get responses that, but previous page, apples to apples to apples to apples, right? Well, I can't compare a taco and an apple, right? The pricing structure is different. The taste is different. Statement of work's different, whatever, right? So, one of the challenges that we specifically have is because, again, we're accountable to the government for taxpayer dollars on things because IT is used for the defense side too, right? We have special process we have to go through with our procurement financial assessment folks, the finance guys that try to compare these things to help make sure that we really are getting a market competitive price for something we don't even know what it is yet, right? And we have a benchmark clause in our contracts that we can execute as well to help circle back on that sort of thing. But up front, it's going to be I know it when I see it, and does the price seem like it's reasonable, and some of those kind of challenges, right? Obviously, that's going to make a more complex negotiation because let's say I've got 8 bidders, I get it down to 1 or 2, I'm going to go negotiate for this innovative solution. What happens if it doesn't work, right? Because I can't take supplier A's neat innovative idea and then try to negotiate it with supplier B, right? Supplier B's got a different innovative idea. It may not be as good. So you got to think about and plan for those kind of things up front. And, ultimately, if it doesn't work, you have to go back and do it again with an RFP where you set the requirements. So it could be really awesome because I didn't know I wanted a taco, but that sounds awfully good right now. Or it could be kind of a disaster, right? And so you got to be able to have that sourcing office maturity with people and processes and all that kind of thing, right, in order to set yourself up for success up front.
So I just want to say we only have 8 minutes left. So I gave Lawrence the last few slides to finish up, so maybe you can just...
So I have to talk faster. And please ask questions. The slides are less important than the interactive conversation here, right? So if you got questions and you'd rather have us talk to your question than the slide, the presentation's available online anyway. Question? So the question was, how often does an RFS turn into an RFP because the buyer wants to take that same solution and see if another provider can do it? Under those circumstances, never, because that would break an ethical guideline for us. We absolutely will not do that. However, we don't do a lot of RFSs. We do them when it's, those few really, really important things to do. And I can't think of a time when we've tried it when it turned into an RFP afterwards. Can you think of any?
I can't think of any either. I mean, we've been pretty successful in the limited times we've done this, where we've actually identified the right audience of suppliers to bid in that situation. We are mature. The suppliers that we choose are either partners or we expect them to become partners, so we know they have the capability, the maturity, and they should be able to deliver the solution. But we've already done the legwork to understand who they are in the market, where they benchmark in the market, all the important factors we needed to know up front before we brought them on the bid list.
Yeah, so real quick example, during the life of the contract, not even a separate thing, we had a situation where we did a 4-year refresh for our end-user computing devices that were mostly desktops at the time. We had a few laptops. And new CEO comes in and says, okay, yea, verily, thou shalt cut thine budget by 8% and reduce it year over year 8%. And it started in a year that we didn't have the refresh. So all of a sudden, we've got hundreds of engineers and thousands of employees whose computers are starting to get pretty old and aren't running the software they need, and we have no money to actually refresh them. So we went to our supplier in effectively an RFS and said, hey, help. We need to be able to get new devices out there. What are we going to do? And the supplier came back and said, hey, I'll tell you what. How about we make it like a cell phone? We'll give you full up end-to-end service. We call it desktop as a service, right? So that's a new way of delivering the same stuff. It includes the computing device. It includes all the support, laptop service centers, all the things that we need in order to support the environment. But because it's the OEM of the service provider, right? So they do everything. They do the hardware, they do the service, the whole thing. They can do it really, really inexpensively and pass those savings on to us. So they found a way to give us, hundreds and hundreds of, I don't even know that, I don't remember the number anymore. It's probably, like $20,000 a year, no, more than that, like $20,000 a month worth of equipment, whatever the number. I don't remember the number. The point is, it was huge value because we're refreshing, 30,000 devices a year or something as part of a deal that's already baked in, and we don't have to go find capital budget and have this swinging budget up and down, right? The innovation there was not the technology or anything, it's the process and the financial deal. So lots of opportunities like that. Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for reinforcing that point. It's really critical that suppliers know that you're not going to just turn around and recompete on them now that they've taught you how to do what you want, kind of thing, right? And so we have a lot of processes in place. And one of the good things about being a defense contractor and being really, really large and complex is everything is documented, all the processes, the procedures, the rules. Like we're really into that. Sometimes it makes us slow to change, but it also makes sure that we don't have those escapes, right? So that we don't turn around and flip something on a supplier and then they never trust us again. Because the person that did that might go to some other job, right? But the company has a memory that's sort of this core thing that I remember something that you guys did to us 25 years ago. It's like, I didn't even work here.
I've heard that before.
But many of I'm that old, but most of us didn't work here that long, right? But people remember, the institution remembers. So to Kate's point, it really is important how you treat the supply base.
So we're down to 4 minutes, And we can keep going on the slides, but there's not a lot of more material here we can't share with you through questions and answers, I think. So, anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, in my limited exposure to this, it's complicated for us, especially because it depends on the type of work that we're trying to source out. With our lawyers, if we can prove that there is some sort of comparison between them, even at a high level, to show that we did compare them to each other in an apples-to-apples version, then they accept it. And we've done that, as Lawrence has suggested, with some of our strategic partners, where we go to them and say, GE, Rolls-Royce, one of you tell us how we're going to get out of this bad situation we're in. And in those circumstances, because we've had prior relationships with them, it actually helps to say we've done an apples-to-apples comparison.
Yeah, let me tag on to that. So there are certain terms and conditions that the legal department owns, like insurance indemnification and limitation of liability, right? There's others that we own directly, things like benchmarking, gain sharing, incentives, that sort of stuff. And there's some that our supplier or procurement organization owns. So when we get something that's unique, we have a process where we can get past the Department of No by showing the business value and what the trade-off is. And our CIO actually has the authority when legal comes and says, we're here to inform you of the risk, it's still your choice, right? Sometimes it even goes all the way to the X-code, depending on what it is. But he is empowered to make those decisions. And so actually our Department of No tends to be security, not legal. And that is a challenge, especially for cloud type. You know, if the data is somewhere else, doesn't mean we can't adopt those solutions. It's just harder. But there's almost always somebody out there who can veto a deal if you don't set it up front. And so, again, it goes back to the organizational maturity where they trust that we actually know what we're doing because we've done it a lot and we've been very successful. I mean, I've personally saved over $1.2 billion in the contracts that I've been directly involved with, and we've done a lot more than that. And so it kind of builds up some idiosyncratic credit, as it were, right? Hey, these guys actually know what they're doing, and they know when they need to beat the supplier up, and they know when they need to partner, and that kind of thing really facilitates that. Plus, one of my closest friends in the company is one of our attorneys, which
We're done.
well, just real quick, go back to
You want to show them?
yeah.
Okay.
All right, just as a parting shot, so thank you, Kate. I actually didn't know about that white paper, and I want a copy. But I also encourage everybody else. Kate's got awesome research. So it's not just us saying stuff. It's like all kinds of companies saying stuff, and that can help build the case to bring to your leadership to get this stuff in place. The other thing I should say real quickly is the amount of effort and time it takes to do an RFS versus an RFP, assuming it's successful, of course, is pretty significantly different. And I'll just kind of leave that up there. I believe we're out of time. Thank you very much for attending. We'll be around afterwards if you have other questions.